Every survivor Lin Chen recruited became permanent system income. That income could buy food, weapons, medicine, and a fortress. Hours earlier, Supervisor Suzu had publicly humiliated him over a report. Then 1 billion people awakened unarmed inside a ruined wasteland. Extreme cold and mutant hordes would arrive within 2 days. His shelter system paid 100 points per registered resident daily. He recruited Suzu first, instantly proving the system rewarded new members. Soon, his expanding team could purchase supplies almost without limit. Lin Chen sank back into his chair, staring at the garbled Excel spreadsheet, his chest heavy with stifled frustration. Just then, a cold mechanical voice devoid of all emotion echoed directly inside his skull. A mechanical countdown announced that the survival game would begin in 30 seconds. The office fell dead silent instantly. A male coworker at the next desk stood and searched the office for hidden speakers. She even threatened attendance penalties, while the countdown continued inside every person's mind. The voice hadn't come from the ceiling speakers nor the computer speakers. The warning resonated inside his mind, and the countdown dropped to 20 seconds. This time, chaos erupted across the office. Coworkers scrambled to their feet. Even Suzu panicked, stumbling backward in her heels, face drained of color as she clamped her hands over her ears. Reading web novels was his only hobby after work, and this bizarre scenario felt eerily familiar to him, while everyone else drowned in terror. A flicker of excitement stirred in his chest. A faint, bitter smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. For once, Lin Chen felt no fear of losing his miserable office life. Suzu shrieked at his expression as the final seconds disappeared, and the transfer began. The second the voice faded, blinding white light burst through the office windows. Lin Chen's vision washed out completely, and a violent sensation of weightlessness tore through him. Screams of utter terror from Suzu and the other coworkers rang in his ears. Lin Chen crashed heavily onto rough ground. He coughed violently, swatting away clouds of dust before scrambling upright, scanning his surroundings with sharp vigilance. He stood dead in the center of a wide, abandoned street. Cracked asphalt stretched beneath his feet, tall weeds sprouting through every fissure. Lifting his gaze, the bustling downtown skyline he knew was unrecognizable, swallowed whole by overgrown vegetation. Skyscraper glass facades lay shattered, exposed steel girders twisting like skeletal monsters against the gray sky. The architecture and plant life mirrored Earth closely, as if this world was an abandoned version of his home planet. Yet, an indescribable eeriness hung thick in the air. Before Lin Chen could process his surroundings, that mechanical voice boomed inside his head once more, loud as a giant bell. All arrivals begin with 0 supplies, no official identities, and no legal protections whatsoever. Global temperatures will plummet to lethal lows, accompanied by a massive rampage of mutated wasteland creatures. 48 hours from now, any human caught outdoors without a sturdy shelter will face a 100% mortality rate. Fight to stay alive. Survivors. Wind whistled through empty ruined buildings, producing a mournful wail. Lin Chen patted down his pockets. He wore nothing but a cheap cotton shirt, black dress trousers, and leather dress shoes. He had been teleported alone to this desolate place. 48 hours, Lin Chen muttered to himself. He drew a deep breath, forcing calm over his racing thoughts. The system had made it clear a death sentence awaited them all in 2 days' time. Humans could not survive 3 full days without food and water, but without proper shelter, the extreme cold and mutated beasts would kill everyone within 48 hours. His top priorities? Find a weapon, scavenge supplies, locate a viable shelter. Lin Chen's eyes locked onto a collapsed storefront along the street. The front door had long crumbled away, the ground carpeted with shattered glass and rubble. Not a scrap of food, not even an empty plastic bottle remained. Lin Chen refused to give up. Combing through the debris, moments later, beside a fallen concrete pillar, he spotted an exposed threaded steel reinforcing bar. He stepped forward, gripped the metal firmly, and pulled hard. The instant his fingers wrapped tight around the rod, a crisp, melodic chime, vastly different from the earlier cold, mechanical voice, sounded inside his mind. Host detected, first weapon obtained. Wasteland shelter point system binding in progress. 1050-100 binding successful. He squeezed the steel bar tighter, his heart hammering wildly against his ribs. Lin Chen realized the impossible system from countless survival stories had become real. A translucent pale blue virtual screen, visible only to him, projected across his field of vision. The host may construct a personal shelter and recruit survivors to join. Each registered member grants the host 100 points daily. Point earnings scale infinitely with population size system. Marketplace hosts may exchange accumulated points for any goods within the marketplace. Inventory covers food, clean water, weapons, construction blueprints, and nearly every conceivable item. Lin Chen scanned the text, breathing fast with excitement. 100 points per recruit every single day. 10 recruits would net 1,000 points daily. If he gathered 10,000 survivors, he would earn 1 million points each day without lifting a finger. In this wasteland where survival hung by a thread, he could endlessly farm points by recruiting more people. Host detected first-time system binding. New user gift pack awarded. Reward, combat enhancement, X1 tactical combat mindset, X1 reward. Initial points, X100 system marketplace, fully unlocked. The blue screen flickered, shifting to an interface resembling an online shopping store packed with categorized goods. Lin Chen immediately pulled up the survival supplies tab. 500 milliliters purified water. 1 point single pack field, ration biscuits. 1 point box, antibiotic painkillers. 5 points. His 100 starting points could buy 100 bottles of clean water, enough to sustain 100 lives out here in the wilderness. Yet he held off on purchasing supplies. The 48-hour death countdown loomed over him like a blade to the throat. A warm current washed through his body as the combat enhancement took effect. Lin Chen stretched his limbs, a satisfied realization settling in. He then noticed a special tab on the marketplace interface labeled Rare Goods Zone. A countdown timer ticked below the empty tab. 5 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. Primary shelter bundle blueprints plus full construction materials. Contains complete core schematics and all building supplies required to erect a sturdy primary shelter, the only viable barrier against the coming extreme cold apocalypse. Price 500 points. Purchase limit. Lin Chen stared fixedly at the line of text. 500 points. He glanced at the point balance displayed in the corner of his screen. 100. Closing the virtual interface, he glanced up at the murky gray sky. The sun peeked over broken skyscraper frames, and his internal work commute clock told him it was roughly 9 o'clock in the morning. The lethal cold would arrive at 9 o'clock the day after tomorrow. Without a shelter, death was guaranteed. He had to earn 400 more points. Lin Chen pulled up the system's point rules once more. Points settled automatically at 6 o'clock each evening. Current time, day 1, 9 o'clock a.m. That meant he only had 2-point settlement cycles before disaster struck. Lin Chen glanced at the top left corner of his interface. The system counted him as one official member by default if he chose to survive alone with no recruits. 100 points at today's 6 o'clock settlement. Another 100 tomorrow evening, plus his initial 100 points. When the cold hit, he would only have 300 points, far too little to buy the shelter bundle. He had to recruit other survivors. If he recruited one more living person before 6 o'clock that evening, his population count would rise to 2. Today's settlement would grant 200 points, combined with his starting 100 points for a perfect total of 500 points. This meant he could not spend a single point for the next 2 days. No water, no food, no supplies. Surviving 48 hours without food or water while trekking across the wasteland would drain all his strength, leaving him defenseless against any mutated creatures he encountered. Recruiting just one person is far too risky. If he gathered 2 or 3 survivors, his daily point income would multiply exponentially. He would not only afford the shelter bundle, but also stock up on water, rations, and weapons. In this hellish wasteland, every living human was a walking source of endless points. Lin Chen tightened his grip on the steel bar, ready to step out of the ruined convenience store. A sharp, rhythmic tapping echoed through the silent, abandoned street, jarring Lin Chen to a halt. He instantly ducked behind a fractured load-bearing pillar. The sound struck against asphalt, and sharp regular clicks. No wasteland monster would wear formal footwear. This had to be another human transported from Earth alongside him. A trembling female voice drifted out from the alley, edged with the familiar authoritative sharpness she'd carried every day at the office, even as fear shook her tone. Lin Chen leaned against the concrete pillar, barely holding back a bitter laugh. For 2 years, it had hounded him daily, sharp, condescending, and endlessly domineering. Suzu, out of a billion humans scattered randomly across this planet. They had landed within walking distance of each other. Lin Chen stayed hidden, watching the alley mouth coolly. Crunching rubble echoed as Suzu stumbled into view. Her crisp white blouse was smudged with gray dust, and a tear ran along her tights. She twisted her ankle mid-step, wincing in pain as she leaned heavily against a rusted abandoned car, trembling from head to toe. Only the wind swirling through dead weeds answered her plea. Lin Chen pushed off the pillar, shifting the rusted steel bar in his hand, his leather shoes crunching over broken rubble as he stepped out of the shadows. Suzu's head shot up wide with fright. Spotting a familiar face in this desolate ruin was her last lifeline. Lin Chen. Suzu pushed off the car, scrambling forward. Lin Chen stood rooted to the spot, one hand dragging the rusted steel rod so its tip touched the ground, staring at her without a shred of warmth. Suzu lurched forward, reaching out to grab the front of his shirt. Lin Chen stepped sideways, dodging her grasp. She froze mid-motion, staring up to meet his eyes. There was none of the difference he'd always shown his superior at work, none of his usual meek compliance. His gaze sized her up coldly, as if evaluating a valuable resource. A shiver ran down Suzu's spine. Yet years of holding a position of authority clung to her, and she raised her voice to mask her panic. Lin Chen brushed rust dust off his steel bar, pulling up his system interface. Target must provide voluntary, clear verbal consent to join the shelter. Lin Chen took a step forward, towering over her. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, and temperatures are already dropping. He delivered the warning without emotion. There is no drinking water, no food anywhere. Suzu shrank backward, her face draining pale. There was no film crew and no police coming to rescue them. There isn't even a rat left to scavenge for scraps. Suzu bit down on her pale lips. At the office, her power came from company rules and performance penalties. The rusted steel rod gripped in Lin Chen's hands was the only law that mattered. She begged, all sharpness gone from her tone. He slammed the end of the steel rod against the pavement with a heavy thud. Suzu stared at him in stunned disbelief, realizing that a highly educated manager now depended on the subordinate she had abused. A cold gust of wind cut through her torn tights, making her teeth chatter. She glanced around the eerie empty ruins, then back at Lin Chen's unfeeling stare. The primal urge to survive crushed all her pride. The system judged her vague statement insufficient as clear voluntary consent. Suzu's jaw dropped, thinking the demand absurd beyond belief. A defenseless, sheltered woman left alone amid the rubble was as good as handed a death sentence. Watching Lin Chen truly prepare to abandon her, Suzu completely lost her composure. She scrambled forward on all fours, throwing her arms tied around his thigh, casting aside her ridiculous corporate dignity, along with her broken heels into the muddy mud. The moment her tear-choked vow left her lips, a pleasant system chime echoed inside Lin Chen's head. Suzu has officially joined the shelter. Lin Chen glanced at the top left corner of his glowing blue holographic screen. Lin Chen lifted an eyebrow, thoroughly pleased. The system's registration was complete. The high and dry former department manager was now fully under his charge. If he survived until 6 o'clock that evening, 200 points would be credited to his account on time. Combined with his starting 100 points, he was only a small step away from the 500 points needed for the basic shelter blueprint. Suzu collapsed onto the ground, overcome with relief at escaping death. She had no idea that in Lin Chen's eyes, she was nothing more than a living point generator. Lin Chen slung a rusted threaded steel rebar over one shoulder and looked down at her. All the resentment he'd bottled up as a subordinate washed right back over her. Back at the office, Suzu hounded everyone relentlessly with performance metrics. But out on this wasteland, those meaningless corporate rules had crumbled to dust, leaving only raw power and the brutal laws of survival. Coated in ash, Suzu's eyes burned red, those sharp, judgmental eyes that had once looked down on everyone now welled with tears. Seeing the once untouchable superior reduced to such a pitiful state filled Lin Chen with quiet satisfaction. Yet emotion was the most worthless currency in the wasteland. This woman was his steady source of daily points, guaranteed 100 each day. If she died before the daily settlement, his entire shelter plan would collapse. He had to keep her alive. Lin Chen's gaze drifted to her injured lower legs. Her tight office skirt was torn wide open, her thin stockings sliced to shreds by shards of broken glass, exposing scraped skin. Sensing Lin Chen's unwavering stare, Suzu instinctively crossed her arms and shrank backward, eyes sharp with weariness. "Quit playing the victim," Lin Chen scoffed, unsparing in his criticism. Suzu froze on the spot, heat flooding her cheeks. She'd thought Lin Chen was leering at her appearance, but it turned out he only saw her as a burdensome liability. Lin Chen paid her no more mind and turned away. This newly recruited point source could not die under any circumstances. First priority, find her sturdy footwear capable of running. If he could scavenge extra supplies along the way, or even recruit another living survivor, his odds of survival would skyrocket. Suzu dare not talk back. She pushed herself shakily off the ground, but the instant her right foot bore weight, a searing pain shot up her swollen ankle, puffed up like a steamed bun. Suzu looked up at him, slipping into her coddling tone. Lin Chen didn't even glance over his shoulder. The wasteland doesn't feed idle hands. With that cold dismissal, Lin Chen strode toward a rusted abandoned sedan. He raised his rebar and smashed the cracked window with a thunderous bang, rummaging quickly through the interior for usable supplies. Seeing Lin Chen and shows zero inclination to treat her gently, every delusion Suzu clung to faded away completely. Terrified, she scrambled upright, dragging her damaged foot forward through gritted teeth. Lin Chen scanned the landscape through swirling dust, locking onto a massive abandoned department store at the end of the street. The grimy signboard still faintly read, "Times Department Store." The path to the mall was littered with wreckage. Cracked asphalt was piled high with rusted metal frames and jagged stone debris. Suzu limped along, every step pure agony, her ankle raw and bleeding within minutes. Lin Chen led the way ahead, moving swiftly without pausing to help her. He gripped his steel rebar in one hand, his eyes sweeping the surrounding ruins like a radar, alert for mutated creatures that could lunge out at any moment. At the same time, he silently gauged Suzu's breaking point. In this god-forsaken wasteland, those who could not pull their own weight wasted precious oxygen. Simply breathing. A journey that should have taken 10 minutes dragged on as Suzu sweated through her clothes. While stepping over a broken concrete pipe, her foot slipped and she crashed heavily into a pile of sharp gravel. A huge patch of skin fled off her palm, and her knee split open, oozing fresh blood. Agony overwhelmed her, and she let out a sharp cry. She stared hopeless at his back. She truly could not take another step. He turned to stare at Suzu crumpled in the dirt, clicking his tongue with extreme irritation. Still, he did not walk off. Instead, pacing back to stand over her, he made no move to offer a hand, only shoving his mud-caked steel rebar into her line of sight. "Grab hold of it and stop slowing us down. A brutal deep freeze will descend in 48 hours. Suzu stared at the cold metal rod thrust before her. That rough rebar was her only lifeline now. Shame at surrendering, tangled with relief that she was not alone. Lin Chen tensed his arm and hauled upward hard. Suzu stumbled unsteadily back onto her feet with the momentum. Though they were only connected by a simple steel rod, her racing heart finally settled, knowing she was not abandoned in the endless wasteland. The pair trudged onward until they reached the entrance of Times Department Store. The glass front doors had shattered into nothing but shards. Darkness swallowed the shop interior, sunlight barely illuminating the threshold. A thick, choking stench of mold and rot washed over them the second they stepped close. Lin Chen held up a hand sharply, signaling Suzu to stay quiet. She clamped a palm over her mouth instantly, not daring to draw even a loud breath. Gripping the rebar firmly, Lin Chen lightened his footsteps and crossed the broken glass into the unknown blackness. Suzu stuck to his back like glue, not daring to drift an inch away. The first floor's former luxury, jewelry, and cosmetics counters were reduced to smashed rubble, unrecognizable trash strewn everywhere. As they crept silently across the mall's central atrium, thud, thud, faint, slow banging echoed from deep within the dark building. Every muscle in Lin Chen's body coiled tight. He froze in place, rebar raised like a predator locking onto prey. Gaze fixed firmly on the source of the noise. Suzu's legs buckled with terror. She clutched his shirt, shaking like a leaf. A hoarse, weak cry drifted out after the banging. The faint plea carried through the dark ruins. Lin Chen did not rush forward. Instead, he grabbed Suzu by the collar, yanking her roughly down behind a collapsed load-bearing pillar. Suzu's knee slammed against sharp stone, and she opened her mouth to scream from the pain. Lin Chen spun around, icy eyes boring straight into her face. Suzu swallowed the cry building in her throat instantly, pressing both hands tight over her mouth. Both hands wrapped around his rusted rebar. He crouched low and edged forward along broken walls, carefully, avoiding loose glass and rubble with every step. They crept slowly to the edge of the second-floor atrium. Dim light filtered through cracks in the shattered glass dome overhead. Lin Chen peeked half his head out to scan the wreckage ahead. Lying before the entrance of an abandoned sports brand shop was a mutated rat the size of an adult medium-sized dog. Its body was covered in rigid black barbs. Jagged fangs jutted from its jaws, and thick foul saliva dripped from its maw. Black blood mixed with gray brain matter pooled across the floor, reeking of rot. Past the corpse of the mutated rat, propped against a load-bearing pillar several meters away, sat a burly man with a buzz cut. His face was caked in blood, his chest heaving rapidly. A deep gaping laceration tore through his right thigh. Flesh split wide open as fresh blood gushed non-stop, staining the concrete beneath him crimson. He had just survived a brutal life-or-death fight, and won. Suzu peeked out from behind Lin Chen's back. The sight of the horrifying giant rat shattered her remaining mental resolve. Her legs slipped and her heels scraped against a piece of broken glass. The sharp sound echoed deafeningly through the silent mall. The burly man against the wall snapped his eyes open. Though gravely wounded, his reflexes remained razor-sharp. He pulled a shard of bloody broken glass tucked in his waistband, gripping it tightly as he fixed his stare on Lin Chen's hiding spot, filled with fierce hostility. Voice hoarse, Lin Chen took a deep breath and stepped out from the shadows. He kept his rebar relaxed at his side, maintaining a 5-meter safe distance and refusing to move closer. When the man laid eyes on Lin Chen and the terrified Suzu beside him, the weariness in his gaze softened slightly. His rigid shoulders sagged, and he erupted into a violent coughing fit, spraying frothy blood from his mouth. The man forced a bitter smile, voice weakening. His name was Jiang Feng, a retired reconnaissance soldier turned survival instructor. Jiang Feng struggled to lift a hand, digging deep into the blood-soaked pocket of his windbreaker. After fumbling for a moment, he pulled out 2 crumpled energy bars and half a bottle of water. He tossed the supplies toward Lin Chen's feet. Jiang Feng spoke with unflinching honesty. Jiang Feng offered his remaining water and food without hesitation. He paused, locking eyes directly with Lin Chen. In this lawless wasteland, food and water meant survival itself. Instead of hoarding his precious supplies, Jiang Feng offered them freely, only begging to retain his humanity in death. Suzu's eyes lit up the second she spotted the energy bars and half-empty water bottle. She quickly tugged at Lin Chen's sleeve, lowering her voice in urgent panic. Suzu urged Lin Chen to take the supplies and leave the dying stranger behind. The scent will draw more monsters soon. Lin Chen turned to look at Suzu. He swatted her hand away hard. Suzu flinched from the pain, stepping back half a pace, utterly stunned. Monster beasts are already roaming these ruins. Suzu paled, unable to utter a single retort. Lin Chen ignored her, redirecting his full attention to Jiang Feng on the ground. If he stabilized Jiang Feng's injuries, shelter population would rise to 3. At 6 o'clock that evening, the system would distribute 300 points. Another 300 would arrive at 6 o'clock the next night. Combined with his starting 100 points from the new arrival package, he would hold 700 points total before the deep freeze hit. The basic shelter blueprint cost 500 points. After purchasing it, he would still have 200 points left over. Inside the system shop, a box of antibiotic pills cost merely 5 points, and a roll of sterile medical bandages cost 2. The cost to treat Jiang Feng was negligible. In exchange, he would gain a bodyguard capable of slaying mutated beasts single-handedly. More importantly, Jiang Feng's willingness to sacrifice himself rather than endanger strangers spoke volumes about his moral code. Betrayal was commonplace. A powerful, principled veteran was ideal. Lin Chen tightened his grip on the rebar and stepped forward one pace. He looked down at Jiang Feng from above. Tone unnegotiable. Obey every order without question. There was none. Only unwavering calm and self-assurance. Jiang Feng bared his blood-stained teeth in a rough smile. He shouted the vow with every last ounce of his fading strength. Lin Chen glanced at the holographic text in his vision. The second-floor atrium of Time's department store. Air of mingled blood and mold. The stench enough to churn anyone's stomach. Once hidden, he pulled up his system interface without delay. Purchase 1 box of antibiotic pills. 5 points. 2 rolls of bandages. 2 points. 1 bottle of disinfectant. 1 point. Soft white light flickered and brand new medical supplies materialized out of thin air. He walked back and tossed the bandages and disinfectant at Suzu's feet. Lin Chen's voice held no inflection. Suzu glanced at the bloodied glass shards, then at the gaping gash on Jiang Feng's thigh, her face turning ashen. She shrank backward instinctively, forehead creased tight, her pampered office attitude flaring up again. Suzu crossed her arms, and he's covered in dirt and blood. Lin Chen did not even bother growing angry. He stepped forward, towering over her. Lin Chen's words cut like a blade. He nodded toward Jiang Fengam on the ground. He can hunt mutated beasts and stand guard as protection. Suzu trembled violently under his scathing judgment, eyes burning with tears, overwhelmed by crushing humiliation. The wasteland does not feed idle hands. Lin Chen gestured at the medical supplies on the ground. The atmosphere plummeted to freezing cold, meeting Lin Chen's emotionless gaze. Suzu completely broke down. She finally understood that clinging to vanity would only get her killed out here. Raw survival instinct crushed every shred of petty pride she held onto. She knelt shakily, grabbed the iodine and bandages, and shuffled over to Jiang Feng's side. Suzu turned her head away so she would not have to watch, pouring the iodine straight onto the open wound. Jiang Feng's facial muscles seized in agony, veins bulging across his forehead. Yet, he bit down hard and did not utter a single whimper. Suzu fumbled clumsily, wrapping the bandages around the wound, her messy work resembling a mummy's wrappings. But the bleeding finally halted. She pried 2 antibiotic pills out of the box and held them to Jiang Feng's lips. A faint hint of color returned to his deathly pale cheeks. He looked at Suzu's blood-streaked hands and tear-streaked eyes, nodding heavily. Jiang Feng's voice remained hoarse, steady with the toughness of a veteran soldier. In this cruel wasteland. That simple word of thanks unexpectedly settled her frayed nerves. She clutched her abdomen, face flushing bright red with embarrassment. She hadn't drunk a single drop of water since the transport, her stamina completely drained. Lin Chen grabbed a steel rebar and ducked into a dim, abandoned shop beside them. Once out of sight, he opened the system store without hesitation. Purchase 3 bottles of 500 milliliters purified water. Cost 3 points. Purchase 3 packs of individual field ration biscuits. Cost 3 points. Purchase 1 high-energy chocolate bar. Cost 2 points. A few minutes later, Lin Chen walked out carrying a dusty, tattered plastic bag and tossed it casually between the 2 others. 3 bottles of water, 3 packs of ration biscuits, plus a high-energy chocolate bar. As a veteran outdoor instructor, he knew better than anyone how improbable it was to find such clean, intact supplies in the wasteland. He shot Lin Chen in a long searching look, asked no unnecessary questions, and grabbed the water and biscuits to eat straight away. Suzu had long shed the poise of a senior manager. She tore open the packaging and chewed the dry biscuits ravenously, nearly choking, and quickly chugged 2 big gulps of water. The 3 huddled behind a load-bearing wall to eat quickly. Lin Chen swallowed his last bite of rations and fixed his gaze on the burly man opposite him. Jiang Feng twisted the water bottle cap shut, his face heavy with grimness. He gestured at the cracked support pillar and the vine-choked ruins outside. Judging by the weathering and overgrown vegetation, human civilization here collapsed a very long time ago. It couldn't have evolved naturally. It's more like a bioweapon spawned by some virus. He paused, sweeping his gaze over Lin Chen and Suzu. The system's warning about an extreme cold snap hitting in 48 hours won't just be a simple temperature drop. Paired with the mutant beast hordes, this is a mass extinction event. Suzu shuddered violently, the small sense of safety the food had given her vanishing in an instant. She instinctively turned to Lin Chen. Jiang Feng's assessment matched his own thoughts exactly. Lin Chen locked eyes with Jiang Feng, his tone carrying unshakable authority. Food and clean water will never run short in this lawless wasteland. The promise of full bellies was the most reassuring guarantee anyone could offer. Jiang Feng and Suzu exchanged a glance. They had no idea what hidden cards Lin Chen held, but seeing the brand new packaging on the supplies, they chose to hold their tongues and follow his lead. Suzu pushed herself upright, stretching her swollen ankle. She glanced toward the abandoned sporting goods shop next to them. Lin Chen, there might be supplies inside. She peeked in, a flicker of excitement in her voice. Lin Chen and Jiang Feng shared a silent look, grabbed their makeshift weapons, and followed her in. The shop was a wreck, thankfully. The back section was sheltered from wind and rain, and several metal storage cabinets in the far corner remained mostly intact. Jiang Feng stepped forward and wrenched the warped cabinet door open with brute force. They were covered in dust, but undeniably valuable gear. Lin Chen tossed a black set to Jean Foam. They'll draw every mutant within miles. Jiang Feng nodded quickly, stripped off his tattered outerwear, and slipped on the new jacket. Suzu rummaged in a corner and found a set of form-fitting black athletic wear and lightweight running shoes. She'd long since grown sick of her torn skirt and broken heels, holding the new clothes to her chest. Her cheeks flushed faintly as she glanced awkwardly at the two men. She bit her lip, her voice barely audible. Lin Chen slung a backpack he'd picked out over his shoulders, then raised an eyebrow at Suzu. With that, Lin Chen turned, gripping his steel rebar. Panic instantly erased her awkwardness as she watched them start to leave. She lunged forward and grabbed Lin Chen's sleeve tight. Her voice trembled with fear, every shadow making her jump. Lin Chen's shin halted, staring at the woman who once commanded entire departments at their company, now clinging to him like a frightened bird. Jiang Feng also slung his chosen backpack over his shoulders, stifling a laugh and turning his head away. "We'll stay right by the door." Lin Chen pulled his sleeve free, his tone calm. Suzu let out a relieved huff. Clutching her new clothes and darting behind the crumpled remains of a fitting room, the two men walked to the shop in trance, their backs to the store, scanning the open mall courtyard wearily. The soft rustle of fabric came from behind them as Suzu changed. Jiang Feng leaned against the doorframe and lowered his voice. "Lin Chen, this mall's layout is a tangled mess." Lin Chen stared out at the shadow-strewn ruins. "It won't shield us from the freezing cold or the beast swarms." As he spoke, Lin Chen's gaze drifted casually over the row of abandoned shops on the second floor opposite them. Crouched behind the broken storefront window of the outdoor expedition shop across the way was a pitch-black silhouette. Its shape vaguely resembled a human, but its limbs twisted backward at grotesque, unnatural angles, as if every joint had been snapped and bent the wrong way. Worst of all, two faint emerald glows burned where its head should be, locked straight onto their position. Jiang Feng Lin Chen's knuckles widened around his steel rebar, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. Jiang Feng reacted instantly, tightening his grip on the glass shard. Across from us, Lin Chen didn't dare turn his head, keeping the target locked in his peripheral vision. Jiang Feng followed his line of sight, his breath catching in his throat, every hair standing on end. The two eerie green glows cut through the dim ruins, triggering an instinctive surge of dread. He did not step back. Instead, adrenaline tensed every muscle in his body as he snapped a sharp warning toward the fitting room ruins. In this cursed wasteland, facing an unknown mutant with only makeshift weapons was a death sentence. While the monster remained motionless behind the window, Lin Chen mentally pulled up his system panel and flicked to the store's weapon section without hesitation. A translucent virtual screen unfolded across his vision, lined with weapon options and their point costs. Fire axe, 3 points. Machete, 3 points. Recurve compound bow, 10 points. Lin Chen's eyes scanned the list rapidly. In this deadly wasteland, bladed melee weapons were the bare minimum for survival. Beneath the melee weapons section lay firearm options. Glock 17 pistol, 1 loaded magazine, 15 rounds, 20 points. A spark lit up Lin Chen's eyes. 20 points was a steep cost when he only had 84 left. Yet he knew better than anyone how low the odds were fighting this bizarre, dangerous mutant with blades alone. If it closed the distance, they'd all suffer critical injuries at minimum. Firearms were a game-changing advantage in the early wasteland. He was about to lock onto the pistol and complete the purchase when the shadow crouched in the far window vanished without a sound. Silence fell over the entire second floor. Jiang Feng, already on high alert, roared out the warning. His grip crushed the glass shard hard enough to cut his palm. Years of military training sent his muscles rigid, his eyes sweeping every dark corner like a radar. Lin Chen's heart hammered, yet his mind stayed razor-sharp, a strange rush of adrenaline coursing through him. Without a second thought, he rapidly tapped the system screen with his mind. 2 fire axes cost 6 points purchase. 1 machete cost 3 points purchase. 1 Glock 17 pistol cost 20 points total. Points spent 29. Items stored in system inventory. At the pleasant system chime echoing in his head, Lin Chen sensed the heavy weight of metal fill his inventory space. He glanced down, drawing the Glock 17 and its spare magazine out into his hands. The cold, solid weight of the firearm settled in his palms, flooding him with a surge of security. He did not reveal the powerful weapon immediately, slipping it quietly into the inner pocket of his hiking jacket. Next, Lin Chen pretended to rummage through the travel backpack he grabbed earlier. Beneath its cover, he hauled out 2 brand-new heavy fire axes with bright red frames and a sharp, weighty machete. The axe sliced through the air. Jiang Feng tracked its trajectory instinctively, dropping the broken glass and catching the wooden handle firmly in his broad palms. His pupils blown wide, he shot a long, unspoken glance at Lin Chen's back, suppressing the storm of questions swirling in his mind. He kicked the useless glass shard aside, gripping the axe handle with both hands, a fierce killing intent blazing in his eyes. Armed with a proper weapon, the veteran's fighting spirit surged to its peak. Lin Chen hefted the second fire axe, tucking the machete securely at his waist. He turned to call Suzu out, only to find her already stepping out from behind the collapsed fitting room ruins. She stood at the edge of the debris, now dressed in the form-fitting black athletic wear, the stretch fabric clinging neatly to her frame. All traces of earlier embarrassment had vanished, replaced by unbridled terror. Oddly enough, she paid no attention to Lin Chen or Jiang Feng, her face drained of all color, eyes blown wide as she stared rigidly upward at the broken glass dome high above the mall courtyard. Her voice shook so badly, the words barely held together, her teeth chattering nonstop. She lifted a trembling hand to point toward the open ceiling, her tone thick with despair. Lin Chen and Jiang Feng's nerves jolted. Both snapped their heads upward at once, following Suzu's trembling finger through thin streaks of gray light filtering through the shattered dome. They witnessed a sight that turned their blood cold. The twisted shadow they'd spotted in the window was no land-dwelling beast. It resembled a colossal mutant spider, its joints bent at impossible inhuman angles as it crawled upside down toward their position, moving without a single sound. The 2 emerald pinpricks of its eyes dragged sickly glowing trails through the dim air. Sensing the 3 prey staring up at it, a massive split tore open where its face should be, unleashing a shrill, piercing shriek. The next instant, the mutant's inverted limbs coiled and pushed hard. The enormous shadow launched itself from dozens of meters overhead, a wave of foul stench surging down as it plummeted straight toward the 3 people below like a cannonball. The phone roared, throwing his burly body forward to shove the frozen Suzu clear of the impact zone. At the same time, he twisted his torso and swung the brand-new fire axe with all his strength, bringing it upward to meet the falling monster head-on. The axe's sharp edge cut a silver streak through the dimness. Veins bulged across Jiang Feng's arms as he twisted his hips, landing a brutal upward slash that connected directly with the mutant spider's front leg joint. Clang! The crash echoed through the rubble. The axe bit half a foot deep into the limb, bursting a sack of thick, dark green bodily fluid that splattered all over Jiang Feng's face. But the creature's weight was far heavier than he'd anticipated. The full force of its mass crashed down onto the axe blade, dragging Jiang Feng's boots 2 deep gouges across the concrete floor. The mutant let out a deafening screech, and another backward twisted hind leg whipped out like an iron baton, slamming hard into Jiang Feng's chest. He crashed through a row of abandoned shelves, skidding 4 or 5 meters across shards of broken glass before coming to a halt. His palms throbbed from the recoil, and the fire axe slipped from his grasp, clattering into the shadows. He lay flat on the ground, his ears ringing, a bitter metallic taste rising in his throat. The mutant spider crashed heavily onto the floor, sending stone fragments flying. It ignored the injured Jiang Feng entirely. Its two emerald compound eyes swiveled slowly, locking onto Suzu, who sat paralyzed on the ground less than 5 meters away. The creature's mouth parts worked back and forth, thick gray mucus dripping onto the tile, where it immediately bubbled and corroded the surface. Its thick, twisted front legs spread wide, adopting a predatory stance. Fear completely short-circuited Suzu's mind. A broken shrill scream tore from her throat, like a cat having its tail stepped on. The mutant spider pushed off with its hind legs, shattering the tile beneath it, and charged forward in a rush, carrying a wave of putrid stench, bearing down on Suzu like a heavy truck. Its two longest front limbs crossed, lunging straight for her neck. 3 meters, 2 meters. A figure burst out from behind a load-bearing pillar on the left. Lin Chen did not shout or roar, his face completely devoid of excess emotion. He spun the fire axe in both hands, choosing not to strike with the sharp blade. He flipped the weapon mid-swing, the flat, heavy back of the axe slamming hard into the mutant spider's hard outer shell as he sprinted forward. Basic physics took hold. Pure momentum transferred in a brutal blow. The monster's charging trajectory veered violently 1/2 meter off course. Its massive body slammed into an abandoned display cabinet beside Suzu, sending mannequin limbs flying and choking the air with dust. Lin Chen's arms numbed from the impact, the fire axe nearly slipping out of his grip. Yet, he did not retreat a single step. The axe strike left nothing but a faint white scratch. Fighting this beast with melee weapons alone was suicide. A crunch of splintered wood echoed from the wreckage, and the mutant spider scrambled free in under 2 seconds, climbing back to its feet. This time, it ignored Suzu completely. All its rage fixed firmly on Lin Chen. 6 segmented legs scrabbled furiously over broken stone. Its 2 front limbs raised high as it launched a dual stab straight at Lin Chen's chest, moving fast enough to blur its outline. Lin Chen hadn't recovered his momentum, his boots slipping on loose gravel. It was an unavoidable blind spot, but he did not panic for a single second. Faced with the bony spears hurtling toward him, he moved against every natural instinct. He leaned forward instead of back, dropping his hips sharply, bending his upper body almost parallel to the ground, the rushing wind stinging his cheeks. Midway through this extreme backward lean, Lin Chen's right hand darted into the inner pocket of his hiking jacket. The moment his fingers wrapped around the cold pistol grip, his heartbeat steadied completely. Within 7 paces, speed belongs to the blade. Within 7 paces, the gun is faster and deadlier. He drew the Glock 17 in a fluid, lightning-quick motion. The black muzzle pressed directly into the mutant spider's gaping mouth, less than 20 centimeters, separating them. Sharp, dense fangs loomed inches away. Rank, slimy fluid splattering across the back of Lin Chen's hand. 3 gunshots rang out in rapid succession. At such close range, there was no chance the 9mm rounds would miss. Each bullet tore through soft oral tissue in sequence, obliterating the creature's central nervous system. The mutated spider's head burst open on the spot. Dark green bodily fluid mixed with brain matter sprayed everywhere, streaking the floor. The monster's massive body twitched twice, its 6 segmented limbs slowly curling inward. It then crumpled like a heap of rotting sludge, crashing heavily at Lin Chen's feet. The faint green glow in its compound eyes faded completely. An oppressive silence blanketed the entire second floor. Jiang Feng hauled himself up from a pile of shattered glass, clutching his chest as he limped a couple steps forward. His face was caked in dried blood, yet his eyes bulged wide, fixed rigidly on the smoking pistol in Lin Chen's grip. In this wasteland, where even scrap metal was near impossible to scavenge, this young man had pulled out the brand-new automatic handgun out of thin air. Jiang Feng's mind raced. As a veteran, he recognized the firearm instantly. A Glock 17 loaded to its full capacity of 17 rounds. 3 shots had just been fired, leaving 14 still chambered. This weapon could never have been picked up as random salvage. His thoughts drifted back to the pristine fire axe and supplies that had materialized out of nowhere earlier. All the pieces clicked into place, and the answer became obvious. He only shot Lin Chen in a long, meaningful glance. Bending to retrieve his own fire axe, he cracked a grim smile. No prying questions, no probing suspicions. Such was the discipline forged by years of combat. Lin Chen turned and walked over to Suzu. She remained collapsed on the ground, propping herself up on trembling hands. A tear ran along the shoulder of her black tracksuit, revealing raw, scraped skin beneath the torn fabric. She stared up at Lin Chen, her lips drained of all color. Lin Chen stood over her, his gaze cold as frost. She clamped both hands over her mouth, nodding frantically as hot tears spilled down her cheeks, not daring to make the faintest whimper. Her perspective of Lin Chen had shifted entirely. All the pride she'd held as a domineering office supervisor shattered into dust. One unshakable thought burned into her core. Now the man she'd once mocked as a worthless nobody was her only shot at survival. Quiet cut through the hush abruptly, pressing an ear to a load-bearing pillar, his features twisting with alarm. Lin Chen focused his ears, listening intently from the rubble-choked expanse beyond them all. A dense rustling sound echoed forth. It was not merely one or two creatures. Countless beasts converged from every direction, surging forward like an incoming tide. The stench of blood leaking from the dead spider hung thick in the air, spreading outward. Those 3 gunshots echoing across the lifeless wasteland might as well have been a dinner bell broadcast for miles. Every mutated beast within several city blocks had heard the noise. Jiang Feng breathed the 2 words, his face draining of color. Lin Chen holstered his pistol without delay and hefted the fire axe once more. The 3 fled through the sports store's rear exit, sprinting down the fire escape and bursting out of the half-collapsed service doorway of Time's department store. Suzu bit down hard on her jaw to keep pace, stumbling repeatedly, yet refusing to fall behind for a single second. They plunged into a narrow back alley, winding behind them all. Tangled vines and rusted overhead walkways blocked nearly all overhead light, while broken concrete and trash littered the ground, plunging the passage into near-total darkness. Behind them, from the direction of the department store, the first low guttural howl split the air. A second, then a third followed in quick succession, blending into a deafening chorus. Swarms of dark silhouettes charged relentlessly toward them all. He turned his gaze back to the pitch-black stretch of alley ahead. At the edge of his vision, a system countdown ticked on relentlessly. Time remaining until extreme cold descends. 41 hours, 17 minutes. Collapsed residential buildings leaned crookedly against one another on either side. Vines as thick as human arms sealing off every side passage. The 3 ran flat out through this fetid corridor. Behind them, the howls rising from the department store merged from scattered, isolated cries into an unbroken, roaring chorus. The clawing stench of rot and blood flooded down the alley, thick enough to churn the stomach. Jiang Feng ran second, clutching his wounded chest with every labored stride, his complexion ash and gray. Still, his footing stayed steady despite his injuries. The hardened frame of a soldier kept him upright when all else failed. Suzu trailed silently at the rear. She nodded, her lower lip raw, her calves shaking uncontrollably. Yet her eyes never strayed from Lin Chen's back, unwilling to lose sight of him for even a heartbeat. After covering roughly 400 meters, they reached the alley's dead end. An overturned city bus wedged itself between 2 ruined buildings, chassis upturned, tires long reduced to crumbled black fragments. Jiang Feng skidded to a halt, quickly sizing up the bus's height and the walls flanking it. He left the rest unspoken. There was no need to elaborate. The hordes' howls, once distant echoes, now rumbled only 2 blocks away. 10 minutes would be more than enough time for the beasts to tear them apart twice over. Lin Chen said nothing, his eyes locked onto the gap beneath the bus's rusted chassis. A half-meter-tall crevice separated the metal frame from the ground, mostly concealed by overgrown vines. He rushed forward, swinging the fire axe 3 sharp times to hack through the tangled foliage. A dark vertical shaft lay exposed beneath, an abandoned subway ventilation shaft. A rusted metal ladder bolted to the inner walls descended into complete blackness. Lin Chen swung one leg over the shaft's edge and planted his foot on the first rung. The corroded metal screeched in protest, but held firm. He descended 3 more rungs rapidly, striking the ladder frame with the flat of his axe, each step to test its stability. The dull thud confirmed it would bear their weight. Suzu leaned over the shaft's rim to peer down, her pupils constricting at the sight of the endless black void resembling a sealed coffin. Another ferocious howl exploded far closer, no more than a single block away. She hesitated no longer, swinging herself over the edge to climb down. The ladder metal burned cold against her palms, loose rust flaking off to slice her skin. She gritted her teeth, descending rung by rung, her fingernails scraping raw against the corroded steel. On the 7th rung, her left foot slipped. Her body lurched downward, a wave of sickening weightlessness surging through her stomach. A single hand clamped tight around her wrist. The grip was powerful enough to ache down to her bones, yet steady as a vice. He did not glance at her face, nor offer any words of comfort. Suzu's throat burned with suppressed sobs that she forced back. She found solid footing beneath her and wrapped both hands tight around the ladder frame. 2 fingernails split cleanly, sending stabbing pains shooting up her fingers. But she bit down hard enough to draw blood rather than make a sound. Jiang Feng climbed into the shaft last, yanking the hacked vines back over the opening to cover it as best he could. The 3 descended all the way to the bottom, their boots sinking into frigid standing water. The air hung damp and icy, thick with the overlapping reeks of rust and mold. Jiang Feng tapped the wall repeatedly with the handle of his fire axe, tilting his head to listen to the reverberations. The hollow echo means it leads to the main platform hall. Lin Chen nodded and led the pair into the left passage. As they moved forward, he let his gaze drift downward, pulling up the system panel projected at the top left corner of his vision. Current time, 1,547 time remaining until daily settlement 6 o'clock 2 hours 13 minutes. Current shelter occupants 3 projected settlement points, gained plus 300 current point balance 55, total points, after settlement, 355, price of basic shelter blueprint, 500 points. He was 145 points short. If all 3 of them survived until the second settlement tomorrow at 6 o'clock, another 300 points would be added. 355 plus 300 equal 655. After purchasing the shelter blueprint, 155 points would remain. More than enough to buy their first batch of vital survival supplies? Points were secondary right now. Every survivor traveling with him was a walking source of steady settlement points. Lose 1 person, lose 100 points. Lin Chen dismissed the panel without breaking stride. Jiang Feng shot a hand out to halt Lin Chen, pressing a single finger to his lips. The 3 pressed flat against the wall and crept silently to the corner, leaning out to observe. The subway platform hall stretched before them. Half its dome ceiling had collapsed, standing water pooling across the train tracks. 4 cracked load-bearing pillars barely propped up the remaining structure overhead. In the hall center, a pile of splintered lumber burned in a crackling campfire. Thin gray smoke curling upward for figures lingered around the flames. A bald, burly brute with a broad scarred frame gripped an iron pipe as thick as a man's forearm perched at top an overturned shopping cart with legs spread wide. Every line of his brutish face broadcast unchallenged dominance. To his left, a lanky, tall man leaned against a pillar, a rusted kitchen knife clutched in one hand, his eyes dark and suspicious. The 3 had stacked shopping carts and salvaged scrap metal to build a crude barricade, blocking off the alternate passage leading back up to the surface. The 4th figure huddled alone in the corner, a thin, spectacled man with his wrists bound tight with electrical wire. Bruises bloomed purple and blue across his face, his split lip crusted over with dried blood at his jawline. The bald brute strode over and drove a boot hard into the bespectacled man's ribs. The bespectacled man let out a muted groan, curling inward without offering any retort. Lin Chen pulled his gaze away and leaned back against the wall. This was no cooperative band of survivors bound by shared hardship. It was a small gang that ruled through brute force. The bespectacled man, nothing more than an unwilling captive force to labor for them. Jiang Feng crept close, his mouth nearly touching Lin Chen's ear. Jiang Feng confirmed there was no safe route around the gang. Lin Chen breathed in an almost silent murmur. And the beast horde is spreading across the surface. Retreating back up means certain death. The only other exit to ground level lies behind their barricade. Jiang Feng frowned, shooting Lin Chen a wordless glance that asked if they should charge through head-on. Lin Chen gave a slight shake of his head. He slung his fire axe over one shoulder and stepped out from around the corner. The sound of his boots slashing through standing water drew every eye at the campfire instantly. The bald brute shot to his feet, leveling his iron pipe defensively. The lanky man and scrawny youth scattered quickly, spreading out to flank him from both sides. Lin Chen halted 5 meters away, firelight casting his face half in shadow. He nodded toward the blocked corridor. The bald brute's gaze swept first over Lin Chen's fire axe, pristine, its cutting edge glinting sharp. Next, he took in Lin Chen's well-fitted, clean tactical jacket and the bulging backpack slung over his shoulders. In these wasteland times, anyone with intact gear was prime prey. The bald brute split his lips in a leering grin, revealing yellowed, rotting teeth. An empty plastic bottle had rolled across the standing water. The lanky man and scrawny youth exchanged a quick look, then slipped forward one after another into the side passage. 30 seconds later, they emerged, herding Suzu and Jiang Feng between them. Jiang Feng still gripped his fire axe, but a rusted knife pressed against his lower back kept him from making any sudden moves. The scrawny youth dragged Suzu forward by the arm, shoving her roughly into the firelight. The moment the bald brute laid eyes on Suzu, his gaze locked firmly on her. Her fitted black tracksuit clung to her frame, her long legs covered by slim, athletic trousers, even smudged with ash and grime. Her features and figure stood out strikingly against the bleak surroundings. The bald brute ran his tongue over his cracked lips, a repulsive, greedy expression twisting his face. He slammed the base of his iron pipe hard against the ground with a metallic clang, tilting his head to stare at Lin Chen. "Leave the woman here with us, and we'll all walk away satisfied." All warmth drained from Suzu's body, leaving her cold to the bone. Instinctively, she scrambled behind Lin Chen, fingers knotting tight in the fabric of his tactical jacket's rear hem. She did not scream, did not weep, yet Lin Chen could feel her hands shaking violently against his back. Lin Chen did not turn to face her. He held the bald brute's stare unblinkingly, his tone calm. He advanced 2 paces, lifting a hand to shove Lin Chen square in the chest. The beast track sent underground. The words hit like a bucket of ice water. The bald brute's outstretched hand froze midair, and the lanky man and scrawny youth paled instantly. Lin Chen's full attention locked onto the bespectacled man instead. Tracking scent, ability to follow prey into underground structures, smoke and blood accelerating their attraction. This man was not spouting baseless fear. He understood the behavioral patterns of mutated beasts, observations only someone with specialized knowledge could make. Lin Chen made his decision in an instant, ignoring the bald brood entirely. He walked straight to the corner and knelt to meet the captive man's eyes level. The bespectacled man stared back, stunned. Only 41 hours remained before the extreme cold arrived. The bespectacled man's pupils flared wide, his lips trembling uncontrollably. The bald brute finally processed what had just transpired. Lin Chen had poached his captive right in front of him on his own claimed territory. The iron pipe whistled through the air, swinging hard toward the back of Lin Chen's skull. Lin Chen had anticipated the attack the moment he'd begun speaking to the captive. He twisted sharply at the waist, dodging the pipe's arc, and swept his fire axe horizontally, the flat of the head slamming dead center into the iron pipe's shaft. The metal pipes shuddered violently, tearing the skin of the bald brute's palms open, his fingers instantly going numb, barely able to maintain his grip. At the exact same second, Jiang Feng struck, despite his injuries. A surge of raw, desperate strength exploded through his frame. He lunged forward, swinging his fire axe overhead in a brutal downward chop, the sharp edge colliding with the back of the lanky man's rusted kitchen knife. The blade snapped clean in 2, metal fragments flying through the air. Before the lanky man could react, Jiang Feng drove his knee hard into his midsection. The man folded in half and flew backward, crashing into the standing water and sending a half-meter wave flashing outward. The scrawny youth spun to run. Jiang Feng hooked his ankle with one foot, executing a crisp trip that sent the youth sprawling flat onto the ground, the back of his skull cracking against the metal train tracks. Within 2 heartbeats, both of the bald brute's accomplices lay incapacitated. After missing his blow, the bald brute's torn palms left him barely able to hold the iron pipe. He stumbled backward to create distance, his boots slipping on the slick water beneath his feet. That single misstep gave Lin Chen the opening he needed to close the gap in an instant. He did not use the axe's sharp blade. The flat rear head crashed into the brute's wrist, holding the pipe. A dull crunch of dislocated bone sounding before any cry could escape. The iron pipe slipped free, bouncing across the ground and vanishing into the dark. The bald brood opened his mouth to shout, but Lin Chen's left hand clamped tight around the nape of his neck, forcing his head downward. The 180-pound man crashed face first into the cold, standing water, muddy liquid slapping across his features. He struggled weakly, only to feel the axe's blade pressed lightly against the skin of his neck. He froze, unable to move a muscle. Zhang Feng walked over with his fire axe, stomping down to snap the discarded iron pipe beneath his boot, then slammed the flat of his axe against the brute's shoulder to pin him flat against the wet ground. The bald brute lay face down in the muddy water, his whole body shaking like a terrified stray dog. Lin Chen approached and knelt beside him, the axe's edge still resting against the man's neck. That line about forcing the woman to stay behind, Lin Chen tilted his head slightly. Muddy water filled the bald brute's mouth as he babbled, desperate tears mixing with the filth covering his face. The fight was not yet finished. The lanky man pushed himself upright from the puddle. The lanky attacker silently grabbed a jagged chunk of broken brick from the ground. He surged forward without warning, swinging the rock toward Lin Chen's skull. At the same time, the scrawny youth faked unconsciousness. The thin boy who laid motionless on the ground suddenly rolled upward, snatching the broken length of iron pipe from the dirt, roaring as he thrust the jagged metal toward Lin Chen's waist. Attacks closed in from two sides at once. His ears caught the distinct whistle of incoming strikes from both directions. He swung his fire axe upward in an upward arc, the flat head blocking the lanky man's brick mid-swing. Sparks flew as the stone shattered into shards. Without pause, he twisted the axe's handle, driving the blunt end straight into the lanky man's Adam's apple. The man crumpled to the ground, clutching his throat, gasping in ragged, wheezing breaths like a broken bellows. The scrawny youth's iron pipe had nearly made contact when Zhang Feng's fire axe descended between them. The flat face of Zhang Feng's axe slammed hard against the pipe, knocking the scrap metal clean out of the youth's grasp. Zhang Feng took a forward stride without hesitation, driving his elbow straight into the scrawny man's temple. The scrawny man's eyes rolled back, and he blacked out for real this time. From the moment the sneak attack began to both men collapsing, less than a handful of seconds had passed. The tall, thin man clutched his throat and curled up on the ground, his voice a cracked rasp as he spat insults. The blow was light, yet more than enough to silence him. The tall, thin man's rant cut off instantly, and he slumped limply into the puddled water. The burly bald man had watched the entire ordeal unfold. He shuddered, scrambled to his feet, snatched a broken iron pipe off the ground, and charged straight at Zhang Feng. He still retained his brute strength, throwing all his weight into the charge. The iron pipe swung horizontally, a desperate, lethal blow meant to kill. He stepped forward half a pace, blocked the bald man's wrist with his left hand, and used the man's own momentum to yank him sideways, spinning his body off balance. The iron pipe struck nothing but empty air. The bald man's foot slipped in the standing water, throwing off his center of gravity. In that split opening, Zhang Feng's elbow shot forward like a bullet, slamming hard into the base of the man's neck. The 180-pound frame crashed heavily into the puddles, sending a huge spray of dirty water skyward. Zhang Feng planted a foot on the man's back and glanced down at him. The bald man went completely limp, not moving an inch again. Silence descended over the basement. Only the crackle of the campfire and the faint ripples settling back across the puddles broke the quiet. Suzu stood beside a load-bearing pillar, her hands twisted tight in the hem of her jacket until her knuckles blanched white. Her gaze was fixed on Lin Chen's back. Flame lights slanted across him from the side, stretching a long reflection across the stagnant water. A heartbeat earlier when the tall, thin man had lunged for Lin Chen from behind. Her heart had felt like it was being squeezed tight in a fist. It was not fear for her own safety. A ridiculous, unshakable thought had crashed unbidden into her mind. Her pulse hammered so hard it ached and her eyes stung, threatening to flood with tears. Lin Chen retracted the fire axe and walked to the corner. He crouched down, pulled a machete from his waist, and sliced clean through the wire binding the bespectacled man's wrists. Lu Yuan rubbed the bloody indentations left by the wire on his wrists, lifted his head to stare at Lin Chen squatting before him, his lips trembling slightly. He quickly replayed everything Lu Yuan had said earlier. How mutant creatures tracked scents, smoke, and blood amplified their attraction, and that the beasts could venture underground. None of it was meaningless begging. Every point held logical merit. This man possessed genuine expertise. Lin Chen stood, slid the machete back into his belt, and spoke plainly. He pushed his lopsided glasses back up the bridge of his nose, first, glancing at the motionless bald man crumpled in the puddles, then at the unnaturally new fire axe gripped in Jiang Feng's hands. Finally, his gaze returned to Lin Chen, lingering 3 full seconds on the young face before him. Lu Yuan held up his bruised wrists to show the wire scars. Suzu, still by the pillar, almost spoke up to defend Lin Chen, but remembered his earlier warning that reckless outbursts would result in punishment and clamped her mouth shut. Lin Chen did not rush to reply. Instead, he posed a counter-question. Lu Yuan froze for a beat. The next instant, his eyes lit up, not from terror or flattery, but the sharp spark of a scholar encountering his field of expertise. Lu Yuan adjusted his glasses, his speech speeding up. Their movement patterns are not random. They avoid open spaces, stick strictly to shaded building recesses, and follow clear chemotactic paths. Advancing along gradients of scent concentration, once the nematode invades a host's nervous system, it hijacks the creature's chemosensory receptors, forcing it to move toward the densest concentrations of blood scent. If these mutant beasts carry a similar parasitic mechanism, then gunshots and blood are a dinner bell for them. Lin Chen finished his sentence for him. Lu Yuan fell silent, staring at Lin Chen for 2 seconds. This young man understood his reasoning, not the hollow, agreeable pretense many offered, but genuine comprehension of the full logical chain, instantly distilling its practical survival value. Lin Chen cut off his train of thought before he could ponder further. Lin Chen's voice carried no warmth, as if negotiating a cold trade. The behavioral patterns, weaknesses, and habits of mutant creatures. This intelligence will be the line between life and death for all of us over the next 41 hours. He lowered his voice, delivering the final line firmly. The campfire popped twice, and the bald man's reflection in the puddles remained unmoving. Lu Yuan stayed silent for 3 long seconds. He glanced down at his battered body and crusted blood on his wrists. Then he lifted his gaze past Lin Chen's shoulder to survey the rest of the party behind him. Jiang Feng, though clutching a chest injury, leaned against a pillar with the fire axe resting across his knees, his line of sight fixed vigilantly on the tunnel depths. Suzu stood quietly, calm and composed. Each person held a clear, vital role. No one shoved or fought over supplies. No one was bound with wire. They were a world apart from the 3 worthless men laid out lifeless in the water. Lu Yuan stood and extended a hand. Lin Chen did not reach out yet, waiting for him to elaborate. Lu Yuan's voice was rough yet steady. The moment their palms met, the familiar system chime echoed in his mind. Eligible survivor has formally agreed to join. Lu Yuan added to shelter member roster. Current official shelter members 4. Lin Chen's gaze flicked to the number flickering in the corner of his retina. 4 registered people would generate 400 points at the evening settlement. Purchasing the primary shelter package still required 500 points. After purchasing it, 355 would remain. More than enough stockpile initial survival supplies. Lin Chen dismissed the system panel and released Lu Yuan's hand. This place isn't safe to stay. The 4 evacuated the subway through a separate exit. The climb was arduous, yet the route stayed well concealed. When they climbed out to street level, the sky had faded to a murky gray. It was roughly 5 in the afternoon, less than an hour before the 6 o'clock settlement tally. Low-rise structures 3 to 5 stories tall, packed tightly together. Narrow gaps between buildings barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. Dried rat droppings scattered across broken stone. He pointed to a 3-story building at the street corner, its outer walls clad in half-pelleted white tile. A rusted metal sign hanging crookedly above the front door. The faded characters Community Health Service Station barely legible. Windows under half a meter wide. Large mutant beasts can't squeeze through. The 3rd floor offered a rooftop terrace for observing movement across the surrounding ruins. Jiang Feng judged it the strongest overnight shelter within 200 meters. Lin Chen glanced the building over and made up his mind without hesitation. The 4 hurried inside the clinic. The second the door swung open, a bitter stench of mildew and aged medicinal chemicals washed over them. Jiang Feng, take Lu Yuan to barricade the 1st floor. Block every window and door with metal cabinets. Suzu, Head to the second floor and clear out an examination room. Suzu parted her lips to speak, then closed them again, nodded, and headed upstairs. She gritted her teeth while hauling a metal medicine cabinet, its height nearly matching her own, yet far heavier than she anticipated. The pharmacy on the first floor had been ransacked completely. Shattered glass cabinet doors littering the ground, only unlabeled empty bottles left behind. But beneath a metal exam table in the second floor treatment room, his boot kicked a sealed iron box. The lid had rusted shut tight. 2 sharp blows from the back of the fire axe popped it open. Deep in another drawer, he found an old hand crank flashlight. The crank was stiff and stuck until he worked it free. After cranking it a dozen times, the bulb flickered to life, casting a dim yellow beam that still functioned well enough. Jiang Feng caught the supplies one-handed. He stared at the iodophore bottle, its production date worn beyond recognition, and the gauze wrapped in age packaging. Nothing like the brand-new fire axe Lin Chen had seemingly produced from nowhere. The only logical conclusion, that mysterious supply source came with steep costs or strict limits. The veteran mentally filed away another piece of the puzzle, yet only tore open the gauze wrapping, neatly bandaged his split palm, and flashed Lin Chen in a lopsided grin. Lin Chen climbed to the 3rd floor alone. The rooftop terrace was small, ringed by waist-high concrete parapets, dead potted plants tilted against the walls, their soil baked into hard gray clouds, half-collapsed department blocks, twisted utility poles, crossroads choked by overgrown vines, all fading gray beneath the dome's hazy glow. In the distance around the Times department store, scattered dark shapes darted between buildings like sharks gliding through submerged reefs. Remnants of the beast hordes still lingered in that zone, refusing to disperse. Southeast, a half-collapsed pedestrian overpass blocked all line of sight. West, a stretch of shantytown ruins. A flicker of warm orange light flashed once in a second-floor window. Reflections shone cold and white. This warm glow flickered on and off. Lin Chen's fingers tapped absently against the concrete parapet. 2 separate calculations raced through his mind at once. If he could bring these unknown survivors into the shelter roster before the 6 o'clock settlement tally, the group count would jump to 5, awarding 500 points in one lump sum, enough to buy the basic shelter blueprint immediately, shaving an entire day off his timeline. When the brutal extreme cold descended, those 24 hours would separate survival from death. His tapping grew faster against the concrete. It was barely past 5 in the afternoon, and the dome's light dimmed by the minute. The route from the clinic to that building crossed at least 3 exposed open streets. Wide open ground with zero cover or shelter. If he left, what would remain to defend the clinic? Jiang Feng fought with a fractured rib injury. Lu Yuan possessed minimal fighting skill compared to even her. The ground floor barricades were only half finished, many windows still uncovered. If he got trapped by mutant beasts halfway there, or reached the building, only to find hostile, cooperative strangers, the half-fortified clinic could be breached in his absence, costing 3 lives and wiping out all future settlement rewards entirely. Lin Chen pulled his gaze away from the distant flickering flame and turned to head downstairs, his steps steady and unhurried. He could search for the other survivors tomorrow. When he returned to the 1st floor, Jiang Feng had finished treating his chest abrasions with the expired iota. Lin Chen glanced at the rise and fall of his ribcage. A couple hairline fractures, no displacement. Jiang Feng patted the bandaged area and grinned. Lu Yuan's voice cut through the quiet from the corner. Lu Yuan sat cross-legged against the wall, his back ramrod straight, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose with his index finger as he spoke. His formal lecture tone felt jarringly out of place amid the dust and dried blood of the abandoned clinic. Single rats pose minimal threat, yet they live in massive colonies, packs of 12 to 40 individuals. They travel along shadowed surfaces and scent gradients, only turning aggressive when triggered by external stimuli. This aligned perfectly with everything he'd witnessed roaming the ruins. He raised a second finger. Their numbers are scarce, yet a single one can slaughter an unarmed small group single-handedly. Lu Yuan's voice dropped lower. He pushed his glasses up, his speech slowing half a beat. Silence fell over the clinic for a split second. Lu Yuan warned that flying mutants would make every open rooftop dangerously exposed. Then the danger rating for all open-air areas has to be raised. He added one last line that includes the rooftop. The words landed, and Jiang Feng instinctively glanced up at the ceiling overhead. He looked back down, but Lin Chen noticed his right hand had drifted soundlessly to rest its fingers around the handle of the fire axe at his side. Rooftop observation shifts will continue as scheduled, but no prolonged stays after dark. Lu Yuan nodded in agreement. Jiang Feng said nothing, tapping the axe handle lightly twice with his fingers. Lin Chen turned and headed up to the second floor. Suzu was still in the clinic room. She'd wiped all the dust off the metal medical bed by the window, then dragged 2 cotton mats over from the adjacent room. A small patch of skin on the knuckle of her middle finger had scraped open, tiny beads of blood slowly seeping out. That morning, no, before the transport incident, these hands had just gotten a manicure. She'd sat in the leather swivel chair in her corner office on the 23 RD floor, legs crossed, tapping the desktop in steady rhythm with her index finger as she reviewed the quarterly report submitted by an employee named Lin Chen line by line. Back then, she'd felt like she stood atop the peak of everything. By the time the sky sank into complete darkness, the 4 of them sat gathered in the second floor clinic. Aerosol particles from smoke spread outward at least 200 meters under stable atmospheric conditions, and firelight is visible from over a kilometer away with no obstructions. Darkness, silence, no scent. The 3 core rules to stay alive. The blackness outside the window looked like ink drowned deep water. Distant, drawn-out roars echoed every now and then, rumbling dully through the ruins. A glowing screen flickered to life in the top left corner of their vision. Cold system text scrolled across it line by line. Current shelter population for people. Settlement points awarded plus 400. Current point balance, 455 points. Only 45 points short of the blueprint. Just one more day. As long as all 4 of them survived until then, the settlement notification faded, leaving nothing but the sound of 4 sets of breathing filling the clinic. Suzu's stomach was the first to break the silence. Right after, Lu Yuan's stomach let out an equally unignorable rumble. By the faint glow of the flashlight, Lin Chen spotted the flaky white skin peeling off his lips, and the blood scab along the old scar at the corner of his mouth split pale and cracked from dehydration. A veteran could endure pain, but not thirst. Lin Chen claimed he had not searched a storage closet at the rear of the first floor. Jiang Feng's voice drifted over from behind. Jiang Feng leaned back against the wall without another word, but a mental tally unspooled in his mind. The brand new fire axe, clean tactical jackets, bulging backpacks, none of which looked like salvage scavenged from the ruins. There was an old saying from the battlefield, only watch if they pull it out when lives hang in the balance. So far, Lin Chen had delivered every single time. First floor inner clinic room. Lin Chen shut the door, confirmed there was no noise outside, then lifted a hand. His thumb slid down the category list first. Food section, water section, medical section, weapons section, construction materials section, cement, steel rebar, thermal insulation boards, waterproof membrane rolls, tool section, diesel generators, welding machines, hand crank drills, protection section, cold-resistant sleeping bags, military parkas, heat packs. Lin Chen's finger paused over the cold-resistant sleeping bags, rated for temperatures as low as -40 degrees C. 15 points apiece for people meant 60 points total. 8 bottles of purified water, 8 compressed biscuit packs, 2 chocolate bars, 20 points total. Current point balance, 435 points. Lin Chen knelt down, swept a handful of dust from the corner, and spread it evenly over every water bottle and biscuit wrapper to cover all logos. He scraped worn scratch marks across the plastic packaging with his nail and crumpled natural creases into the chocolate foil wrappers. He stuffed the supplies into the bottom of his backpack and brushed the dust off his knees. He split the water and biscuits evenly between the 4 of them. Everyone needs to eat their fill tonight. Suzu's hands shook as she twisted open her water bottle. Lu Yuan habitually sniffed his biscuit to check it was safe before taking a bite. Jiang Feng tore open his pack with one hand, finished the biscuits in 3 bites, and washed down the crumbs with 2 gulps of water. Jiang Feng chewed slowly, then shot Lin Chen in a faint grin, saying nothing at all, with food in their stomachs. Fear receded a small step back. Lu Yuan pushed his glasses up. Lu Yuan picked up next, PhD candidate at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. He pulled out the slide with a chipped corner and waved it lightly. A souvenir. Suzu fell silent for several seconds before speaking. Suzu dropped her head, twisting the hem of her shirt tightly between her fingers. Jiang Feng's gaze flicked back and forth between Suzu and Lin Chen. It's been less than 40 hours since the extreme cold descended, and this clinic can't withstand frigid temperatures. No heating, proper ceiling, or fuel to speak of. Quiet settled over the clinic again. Civil air defense bunkers, underground fallout shelters. Lu Yuan trailed off, his gaze lingering meaningfully on Lin Chen. He'd noticed the suspiciously clean salvage supplies earlier, but chose not to voice his suspicion. Yet they carried the trust forged through years of life or death combat. They agreed to trust his plan until the following afternoon. Lu Yuan would map safe routes and record every zone showing mutant activity. Lu Yuan, draw a detailed map and organize patterns of beast movement. Suzu has no combat experience. The first shift is meant for rest. Distant beast roars, dragging on far into the void. Lu Yuan suddenly lowered his voice to a whisper. Lin Chen didn't shift his position. Lu Yuan pointed out the window. Lu Yuan adjusted his glasses again. They won't survive the night. The second possibility was that the distant survivors believed no creature could attack them. After 8:00 p.m., the clinic sank into total darkness. Doors on the first floor were barricaded tight with waiting room chairs and metal filing cabinets. A 2-finger-wide slit had been cut into the cardboard just large enough for one eye to peer through. The block lay deathly quiet. Distant beast roars rumbled faintly through the ruins before fading away. Lin Chen's gaze drifted through the slit, habitually scanning due north. Lu Yuan watched alongside him, pushing his glasses up and mouthing words without making a sound. Lu Yuan breathed out in a near-silent hush. The orange light hadn't dimmed gradually, as if burning out naturally. He didn't put stock in omens, yet his hand drifted to rest on the Glock 17 holstered at his waist. Lu Yuan shook Jiang Feng awake immediately. The veteran's hand clamped tight around the fire axe. A soldier's internal clock was etched into his bones, no matter how deep his sleep. A single touch jolted him fully alert. Suzu lagged a split second behind. Jiang Feng clapped a palm over her mouth, holding a single finger to his lips. Suzu's eyes blew wide. Then she nodded sharply a second later. The four of them huddled low by the second-floor window, holding their breathing as shallow as possible. At the 20-minute mark, the alley west of the clinic, the crunch of gravel underfoot. More than one person. Lin Chen silently drew his Glock 17, lifting his left hand to signal Lu Yuan. Suzu crouched in the corner, hands pressed tight over her mouth, eyes wide with fright. But she didn't make a single noise. The front door of the first floor banged repeatedly. He peered down through the slit in the cardboard. Gray diffused moonlight filtered through the broken dome overhead, casting faint outlines of 4 figures crowded against the clinic entrance. Blood behind him stood a woman wearing medical scrubs, the standard uniform for hospital nursing staff. Lin Chen studied the uniform briefly. The last figure caught Lin Chen's eye for a longer beat. A young woman, roughly 160 centimeters tall, with short hair and a lightweight windbreaker. She stood with her back to the clinic entrance, facing the path they'd fled from, feet shoulder-width apart. With her weight lowered, her right hand wrapped firmly around an object. Lin Chen glanced down the road they'd come from. The door banged 3 more times, the man's voice growing more desperate. Blood continued drifting down the man's injured right leg. He swayed unsteadily, propping himself against the doorframe to stay upright. The young woman covering their rear never once turned to glance back at the clinic, her gaze fixed firmly on the road behind them. On the surface, none of them appeared to pose an immediate threat. If they could join the shelter's roster, each settlement would grant an extra 400 points. He carried the fire axe downstairs, dragged the waiting room chair, blocking the front door half a meter aside, pulled the door open to a narrow slit just wide enough for someone to squeeze through sideways. He held the fire axe horizontally across his chest, blade pointed outward. The young woman covering their rear entered last. Her first move upon stepping inside wasn't to head deeper into the clinic. Jiang Feng pushed the door shut, shoving the heavy chair back to barricade it again. The instant the door latched closed, scratch, 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 scratch. Suzu's entire back went rigid. Lu Yuan instinctively stepped half a pace backward, his hand brushing the wall for balance. The pavement outside the clinic swarmed with gray-furred mutant rats. They were smaller than the mutants they'd spotted around the shopping mall earlier that day, but their fangs stretched longer, their eyes clouded and bloodshot red. More than 30 mutant rats lined up perfectly 3 meters away from the clinic's front door, arranged in neat uniform rows. They didn't scratch at the door, gnaw at the walls, jostle one another, or even make a sound. His pupils shrank to pinpricks, lips pressed thin into a tight line. He'd seen rats before on battlefields deep in jungle terrain. Rodents were chaotic, greedy, scrambling over one another in mindless frenzy. Lu Yuan squeezed up beside the door crack, took one look, and gasped sharply, "But these rats are spaced nearly equidistant from one another." At those 4 words, Lin Chen spun his head sharply. His gaze cut through the darkness and landed on the young woman standing in the middle of the hallway, facing the clinic's front entrance. The woman brought the whistle to her lips, puffed out her cheeks, and blew hard. A shrill, high-pitched tone split the air, but the noise pierced through the wooden door and vanished into the night. Outside, more than 30 mutated rats lurched backward 2 steps in perfect unison, moving as if pulled by a single shared rope. The rat pack froze for a single second. The rats retreated once more. Gray shapes streamed backward like a receding tide, crossing the street, vanishing into the shadows of the buildings opposite before hunkering down 10 meters away. The young woman lowered the whistle. Outside, the mutated rats squatting 10 meters off formed a still gray tableau. Lin Chen sorted through every piece of information racing through his mind. They had come from due north. The man's leg wound still oozed blood. The woman in the nurse uniform had no combat capability whatsoever. Only this young woman remained standing, and she held a whistle capable of commanding 30-plus mutated rats to retreat in lockstep. The young woman's breathing had not yet steadied, but she quickly tucked the whistle back into her coat pocket, her fingers wrapped firmly around it. With the whistle secured in her pocket, she shifted half a step back, raising her empty left hand to shield her torso. He noted her stance, her heels barely lifted off the ground, poised to spin and run at any moment. She knew full well that stepping outside this door meant facing 30 mutated rats waiting in the dark. The woman let out a cold huff. It was the man clutching the little girl who spoke first, half kneeling on the floor, his right trouser leg soaked through with blood from his bite wound. She found it, rummaging through an underground parking garage. The man shrank back slightly, but kept to talking. Xinyu Lin Chen memorized the name. On a whim, Xinyu twisted around to retort, out of curiosity. Happy now. The second she blew it, those rats jolted as if electrocuted and leaped backward in unison. She knew that better than anyone. The first time she'd blown it, 3 mutated rats had been clambering through the window. The instant the high tone rang out, the 3 rats tumbled off the windowsill, twitching on their backs for several seconds before scrambling away. Yet, the device only seemed to affect mutated rats. That was why she'd stayed behind to cover their retreat during their 800-meter dash here, blowing the whistle once to drive the rats back a stretch, repeating the cycle until she dragged the 3 of them to safety. Her lips were raw and numb from blowing nonstop. Too dark. Gaping bite marks marred his right calf, ragged torn flesh lining the edges. Blood had dyed his pant leg a deep brown, pooling on the floor beneath his lower leg. He had lost a dangerous amount of blood. Lin Chen pulled his gaze away and turned back to Xinyu. Zhao used to operate tower cranes. Those 2 bites on his leg are the price he paid. The young woman's gaze returned to Lin Chen. She had braced herself for haggling, even for him to snatch it by force. She stepped half a pace back, shifting her weight low, yanking the whistle out of her pocket to grip it firmly in her fist. Beside them, Suzu froze, her mouth hanging open as she stared at Lin Chen's profile, a figurative cord snapping inside her head. Lu Yuan's fingers halted mid-motion as he pushed up his glasses, a flicker of complex emotion flickering behind the lenses. Jiang Feng did not move, but his knuckles wrapped around the handle of his fire axe. Zhao Qi reacted the most violently. She strode forward to plant herself squarely in front of Xinyu, throwing her arms wide to shield the younger woman. Her voice trembled, yet carried loudly through the room. He then pulled his gaze away. Their teeth almost certainly carry unknown pathogens. Xinyu's fist around the whistle loosened slightly. Lynch's tone remained flat, each word deliberate and heavy. Joe can operate tower cranes. Zhao Qi has medical livestream experience. Finally, he held up one finger, gesturing toward the whistle tucked in Xin Yu's pocket. A faint flicker of relief crossed Xin Yu's face, only to vanish as she pressed her lips tight once more. Her eyes drifted to Lin Chen's companions in the background. Jiang Feng leaning against the wall with his fire axe resting across his knees, his face devoid of any excess emotion. Her back straight, chin tilted slightly upward. Her gaze slid from Zhao Qi to Xin Yu before landing on the kneeling man and the tear-streaked little girl beside him. She tilted her chin toward the front door. 30-some rats are still camped out there. She paused, glancing sideways at Lin Chen. Her tone was neutral, as if stating an objective fact. He said nothing, but the corner of his mouth tugged upward faintly. Suzu had learned quickly. While Xin Yu studied Lin Chen for a long moment, Lin Chen did not answer the question. 2 beats of silence passed through the clinic. Zhao lifted his head to meet Lin Chen's gaze. Zhao Jigang insisted that Tong Tong remain under his protection. Lin Chen mentally tallied his supplies and shelter points. 7 years old, but the system only recognized official shelter residents regardless of age. Every new person meant an extra 100 points each day, a pure gain with no burden attached. Moreover, young children bonded fiercely to whoever cared for them. Loyalty would never be an issue with her. Zhao Qi knelt beside him, pressing her palm to his calf wound to slow the bleeding, then lifted her head. Her voice was far quieter than when she'd shielded Xin Yu earlier. Her gaze fixed on her blood-stained fingertips rather than Lin Chen. A faint muffled whimper echoed from the corner. Tong Tong stood beside Zhao, clutching her stomach with both hands, stifling her cries. Her fingers brushed through the girl's hair with a gentleness that felt utterly unlike her usual demeanor. Lin Chen watched the exchange without comment. Xin Yu stood in the middle of the hallway, her right hand still curled around the whistle in her pocket, her lips pressed into a thin, rigid line. Her eyes swept the entire clinic. Suzu crouched beside the child. Lu Yuan remained seated in the corner, while Zhao Jigang knelt on the floor. She took every detail in. Then she unclenched her fist. She had prepared endless bargaining points, even contingency plans for him to seize the whistle by force. She had never imagined he would let her hold on to it without a fight. Lin Chen told Suzu to fetch the leftover antiseptic and gauze they had used to treat Jiang Feng's injury earlier. Suzu handed the supplies to Zhao Qi, who immediately set about cleaning and bandaging Zhao's bite wound. Iota 4 splashed across the raw lacerations, and Zhao let out a low, grown fresh sweat beating across his forehead. Zhao Qi's technique was firm and earnest, yet the gauze wrapping was unevenly tight. Joy's hands froze mid-bandage, her expression a mix of embarrassment and exasperation. A beat of silence fell over the examination room. Zhao Qi mumbled, resuming her bandaging work. Another beat of silence passed. Jiang Feng, leaning against the wall, suddenly raised an eyebrow. The 2 men exchanged a faint knowing smile. Lu Yuan looked utterly confused, with no clue what they were referencing. Zhao Qi's head shot up, shooting sharp glares at the pair. Jiang Feng cleared his throat awkwardly. Suzu knelt beside Tong Tong, the corners of her lips twitching upward before she forced her expression neutral again. Zhao Jigang has joined the shelter. Tong Tong has joined the shelter. Zhao Qi has joined the shelter. Xin Yu has joined the shelter. Current shelter population, 8 people. The 4 notifications popped up in rapid succession. 8 residents. 100 shelter points per person daily. 80 points total to be credited tomorrow at 6 in the afternoon, while other survivors huddled together, shivering to death in the coming extreme cold. His people would have access to warm water to drink. Jiang Feng and Lu Yuan take the first half of the night. No one voiced any objections. Zhao's wound was fully dressed, wrapped thickly in gauze that left his calf swaddled like a mummy, though the bleeding had at last stopped. Every single person jolted awake to the same voice echoing directly inside their minds. A cold, motionless electronic tone resounded. Any survivor lacking an enclosed shelter and sufficient thermal supplies would face a 100% mortality rate. Her lips moved, yet no words escaped her. Zhao Qi ground her teeth, digging her fingernails into her own forearm. Suzu did not glance toward the window or the system warning. His expression was blank, his voice steady. Less than 10 seconds after Lin Chen had finished speaking, Jiang Feng had slung his backpack over his shoulders. Suzu twisted open her water canteen and let Tong Tong take a couple of sips, wiped the dust off the little girl's cheeks with her sleeve, then took her hand and followed behind. Xinyu walked at the very back, clutching a whistle tight in her right hand, her knuckles white with strain. The two crashed into the wall at the corner. Zhao Qi's knee slammed against the sharp edge of a step, and she stifled the groan, ignoring her own pain to check Zhojigang's injured leg first. Yellowish-gray pus seeped out from the bandage's edges, trickling down his calf, and a sickly, sweet, rotting stench filled the air. The skin surrounding the wound had turned a murky black-gray, his lips stained a deep purplish blue. Lu Yuan knelt down for a quick look. He needs oral broad-spectrum antibiotics to fight the bacteria systemically. Zhao Qi's hands froze mid-air, every trace of blood vanishing from her face in an instant. Suzu knew nothing of medicine, but she understood what that single term meant. Tong Tong stood beside him, tilting her head to stare unblinkingly at his black-gray swollen calf. The 7-year-old girl said nothing, shed no tears. Then Tong Tong suddenly reached into her pocket, rummaging around until she pulled something out. Her voice was barely audible, yet every syllable clear and deliberate. All sound in the stairwell cut off completely. Zhao Qi knelt beside them, her lips trembling, unable to utter a single word. That blue-patterned glass sphere was everything she owned. She held out her only possession, her arms shaking, refusing to lower it. The pocket had been empty before. Now it held a glass marble worth a human life. Zhao Qi turned her head away, rubbing her eyes hard against the back of her hand. Suzu sniffled, bending to pretend, sorting her backpack, her head bowed the whole time. There might still be supplies left. Jagged steel rebars jutted out from broken concrete. Lin Chen slipped inside, confirmed no one lingered nearby, then opened a glowing translucent system screen floating before him. He skimmed the food section. His gaze lingered there for 3 seconds. He closed the food menu. 8 bottles of purified water. Follow the dosage instructions exactly. Split the water and crackers evenly among everyone. 8 people need to survive the cold. We'll comb every building within 500 meters. This clinic won't cut it. Single-story brick construction, 2 broken windows, no underground levels. Those large multi-story structures almost certainly have underground parking garages or commercial basements. Perfect for converting into a shelter. Jiang Feng's grip tightened around his axe handle. Lu Yuan pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Lin Chen gave a short nod. Before departure, Lin Chen laid out their travel route. The air had turned noticeably colder than the previous day. Wispy white fog curled from every breath they exhaled. Their daily settlement would hit at 6 that evening, bringing an incoming 800 points, leaving a total balance of 1,214. Converting the underground shelter would cost 500 points, leaving 714 held in reserve, more than enough to sustain them long after the deep freeze hit. Jagged brick fragments and bent steel rebar jutted upward from cracked asphalt, forcing them to pick their footing carefully with every step. Jiang Feng led the group, clutching a steel pipe torn from a collapsed wall in his left hand, prodding every pit and shadowed corner as they advanced. Lu Yuan walked half a step behind his right shoulder, his eyes fixed on the structural frames of the surrounding buildings rather than the ground beneath his feet. This frame design will create severe thermal bridging once temperatures dropped to -40, pulling interior temperatures level with the outdoors. No blood, just that yellowish-gray fluid glistening faintly in the pale morning light as it dripped down his calf. Tong Tong stayed close at his side. One tiny fist curled around the hem of his work jacket, the other clenched tight at her side. Xinyu took position near the rear of the line, her whistle gripped firmly in her right palm, head swiveling left and right to scan every black empty window opening in the surrounding rubble. Lin Chen glanced at the environmental temperature reading in the corner of his floating system panel, 3 degrees Celsius. The temperature had dropped 4 degrees in 40 minutes. He said nothing of the number. Spreading word of the plummeting cold would only send the group spiraling into panic. They traveled roughly 800 meters when they reached a ruined crossroads. Every member of the group stopped dead in their tracks. Not the dry, sour reek of mutated rat waste they'd grown used to over the past 2 days. This scent was damp, heavy with metallic rod, sharp enough to burn the throat like gallons of fresh blood spilled across the pavement. Still steaming, he came to a stop. Glancing back at the rest of the group, Lin Chen dropped his stance and moved forward to join him. Their torsos had been split open from the ribcage outward. Ribs spread wide. Streaks of dragged internal organs, marking curved trails across the asphalt, dark red and frothy. Suzu clamped both hands over her mouth, fingers digging into her cheeks, eyes blown wide with horror. 3 sets of claw marks. Not the fine, tiny scratches left by mutated rats. Deep grooves as thick as a thumb, grouped in 3s, fanning outward with over 15 centimeters of space between each mark. The claws had gouged half a centimeter deep into solid asphalt. 3 of them. Jiang Feng's lips barely moved, his voice forced through gritted teeth. 40 meters out, crouched in a shop doorway, feeding on something bigger than a full-grown large dog. Most of their fur shed away, jagged teeth protruding out of their jaws. The alley to the left was completely blocked by collapsed building slabs. Cold sweat soaked Zhao Jigang's skin. His jaw locked tight. Lin Chen stared at the crossroads for a long moment. A cold breeze blew south to north, carrying the scent of 8 living humans straight toward the 3 feeding creatures 40 meters away. The lead mutated beast suddenly snapped its head upward. The 3 mutated beasts did not retreat, not a single step backward. Xinyu blew the whistle a second time. The mutated beasts took a single step forward. Shenyu's face drained to sickly blue-white, lowering the whistle from her lips, her hands shaking violently. She'd covered their retreat 800 meters the night before, blowing the whistle non-stop to fend off swarms of mutated rats. A massive bulk of pale gray muscle surging forward. Its front paw slammed into the van's crumpled engine hood, caving the thin sheet metal inward into a crater the size of a wash basin. Jiang Feng dodged sideways, swinging the axe hard to slice into the beast's side neck. In the split second, he struggled to yank the axe free. The second beast crashed into him from the flank. He held the axe horizontal before him, stepping back 1 pace. 3 beasts against 1 man. The third mutated beast ignored Jiang Feng entirely. The moment he lifted the barrel, 3 critical thoughts flashed through his mind. 9mm handgun rounds. Gunfire echoes travel no less than 1 kilometer through the rubble cityscape. The mutated beast stood 8 meters away from Zhao Jigang. The impact snapped its flat skull sharply to one side. Its forward momentum broke, and it tumbled headfirst into a pile of rubble, thrashing all 4 limbs wildly. The remaining 2 mutated beasts backed away from Jiang Feng 7 or 8 meters, lowering their bodies to hiss out threatening snarls. Lin Chen shifted the pistol's aim, locking onto the lead creature. The lead mutated beast tilted its head, its murky yellow eyes fixed on the dark muzzle of the gun. 5 seconds later, it spun around and darted into the shadows of the ruins. The second creature vanished right after it. Suzu watched Lin Chen holster the gun at his waist, her lips parting slightly, yet she said nothing. Xinyu stood rooted to the spot, clutching her whistle, her eyes rimmed red. The gauze wrapped around his injured leg had soaked through with fresh blood. The little girl nestled quietly in his arms, not shedding a single tear. Lu Yuan knelt beside the mutated beast's corpse. Lu Yuan prodded a strand of muscle fiber with the twig. He glanced up at Xinyu. The cochlear structures of these mutated canines have likely undergone drastic restructuring, leaving them far less sensitive to ultra-high-frequency sound waves. At that single word, the whole group sprang into action. They would not retrace their original path. Lin Chen pointed to a narrow gap between 2 buildings, straight left, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. The echo of the gunshots still hummed in everyone's skulls. Zhao Qi supported the limping Zhao Jigang in the middle. Suzu held Tong Tong's hand, the little girl's short legs pumping fast as she trotted along without a sound. Xinyu walked just ahead of Suzu, her right hand still clamped tight around her whistle, though she never lifted it to her lips. 3 mutated beasts. 3 blasts of the whistle, 0 effect. The ground shifted from piles of broken brick to cracked asphalt. The buildings lining the road grew larger. The instant Zhao Jigang sat down, a muffled groan escaped him, and fresh sweat beaded thick across his forehead. Xinyu suddenly raised her hand, fingers pressed flat, palm facing down in a silent signal to stay quiet. She tilted her head toward the right rear, the tendons in her neck taut as she angled one ear to listen. 3 seconds passed. Xinyu breathed in a near-silent whisper. Jiang Feng's hands settled firmly on the handle of his fire axe. A woman, her clothes coated in dust, her hair matted and loose. In her left hand, she carried a canvas sack, He told Zhangfeng to stay back and guard the group, then walked out alone into the open space, halfway between the two sides. That gunshot echoed down every street for blocks. A map, she said. A complete schematic of all underground facilities in this zone. It marks every underground pipeline, civil air defense bunker, and subway connecting passage. No one could be certain if ordinary underground parking garages would hold up once temperatures plummeted to -40 degrees Celsius. Combined with the shelter blueprint package from the system, a military bunker left no room for doubt. The shop carried no category for military-grade underground facility schematics. This was a resource impossible to buy with points, and it had walked straight up to him in a sack. Whenever this man fell silent right away, he had already made up his mind. He only pretended to hesitate. He must have worked sales in his past life. The woman answered a little faster than before. No one else could parse this whole schematic in 10 minutes flat. A trained specialist capable of translating blueprints into viable construction plans. 3 layers of gains stacked on top of one another. Lin Chen dismissed the virtual screen. At 6 o'clock that evening's settlement, Lu Yuan hurried over once, his fingers sliding quickly along the labeled lines, his lips moving silently as he read. She had handwritten 3 characters next to it. Class A Air Defense Bunker. Double red border with solid red fill. Matches the legend perfectly. Lu Yuan turned to face him. Class B bunkers are just regular basements, fitted with a single blast door built to meet minimal standards. Class A bunkers come with fully independent air filtration ventilation systems, all intake and exhaust pipes pre-buried. In wartime, they can operate in complete closed air circulation at -40 degrees Celsius, even if the outside freezes solid. One more point. Class A air defense bunkers are engineered for a service life of over 50 years with massive structural redundancy. Standard parking garages only have thin slab ceilings, heat leaking out like a sieve. With minor additional reinforcement, they can withstand extreme temperatures on an entirely different scale. Zhao Jigong leaned against the wall, listening, his lips stirring. Fang Min dragged the tip of her pencil from their current position to the marker. Straight line distance is 5 kilometers. This was unequivocally the best possible shelter location available to them right now. He knelt beside the map, already mentally calculating how to deploy the shelter starter package blueprint atop this Class A air defense bunker. She knew he was already tallying profits and plans again. Still, she relaxed her crossed arms slightly, glancing from the map to Lin Chen's profile. Then, and back to the blueprint. Jagged building silhouettes cut a ragged skyline against the leaden haze in the distance. 2 kilometers to go. 9 lives hanging in the balance. 22 hours left until the extreme cold hit. The 2 kilometers trek took 47 minutes to complete. Along the way, they crossed paths with 2 packs of mutated rats, each group only 7 or 8 strong. Xin Yu blew 2 short blasts on her whistle. The third encounter was a lone mutated hound, slightly smaller than the 3 they had faced earlier. The instant the beast crumpled, he brought the fire axe down hard, chopping into the junction between its cervical vertebrae and skull. This time, the blade sank deep, cutting roughly 4 centimeters into flesh and bone. Lu Yuan watched the exchange, pushing his glasses up his nose. Zhang Feng shook coagulated blood off his axe blade. Fang Min walked midway through the group, never letting go of her canvas sack slung over her left arm. She clutched her pencil in her right hand, scribbling new labels on the blank margins of the map as they traveled. The tip of her pencil tapped the map. Zhao Jigong color had improved slightly since they set off. The antibiotics had taken effect, easing the fever, burning his forehead. Yet his right leg remained swollen, forcing him to limp heavily with every step. The group rounded the collapsed, curved outer wall of the stadium. The ramp sloped downward, vanishing into pitch-black darkness. Fang Min circled the spot heavily with her pencil on the map. Lin Chen stepped forward 2 paces, then came to an abrupt halt. The disturbed dust around each print had not yet been smoothed flat by the wind. Lin Chen raised a hand, signaling the entire group to stop. His gaze swept along the outer walls flanking the entryway. 60 meters to the right, figures shifted in the empty ground floor doorway of a 3-story commercial building. 2 burly men, one tall, thin frame, one short, stocky man, and another wearing a baseball cap. The second large man was Akun, covered in a thick beard, a homemade crossbow strapped to his back. its bow arms bent from steel rebar, nylon cord for a string, metal bolts serving as ammunition. Mu narrowed his eyes to study the group outside, counting them silently in his head. A tall, thin man behind him bore a military backpack, seemingly stocked with ample scavenged supplies. The woman leading this female group wore athletic wear, a steady, confident gait, clutching an unknown object in her hand. Behind her walked a woman with long hair, delicate facial features, her pale skin standing out starkly against the gray, dusty ruins. Medical staff were an extremely valuable resource in this lawless wasteland. Only the man with the axe poses any real danger. Dong rubbed the steel rebar gripped in his palms. A man wearing a baseball cap edged closer. Mu's gaze drifted back to the window. Dong's expression shifted, his grip tightening around the threaded steel rebar in his hands. It was the grin of someone who'd weighed every possible plan in his head and settled on the most profitable one. If he had unlimited ammunition, he wouldn't have only fired twice at the mutated beast earlier. Go over there with friendly faces and strike up conversation. The opposing group had noticed their movement. Mu took one last glance toward the ramp. The entrance to the class, a civil air defense shelter, sat right there. The airtight blast door couldn't be pushed open from the outside with no electricity or hydraulic power. 4 women, a small child, and 1 gun with scarce ammunition. He held both hands out with palms facing outward and stepped out from the ground floor doorway of the commercial building. His voice echoed across the rubble, warm and casual, as if he'd run into an old neighbor at the complex gate. Lin Chen's tone was light, like making small talk. Mu led 5 men out of the doorway, one after another. He tapped the chest of his windbreaker. He tilted his head, speaking like someone sharing a table at a street stall. The bearded man slung a homemade crossbow across his back, the bolt already loaded in its groove. The stocky short man gripped half a brick in his right hand, and the baseball cap wearer had a length of iron pipe tucked at his waist. 6 weapons in total, all crude makeshift arms. His posture relaxed despite the standoff. Just passing by to take a look. This is clearly a civil air defense shelter. Work out a way to open the door side by side. When the cold comes, we'll all have somewhere safe to ride it out. By the window, a blurry silhouette flickered for a split second before vanishing into shadow. 6 men stood out front, but there were more people upstairs. Suzu stood midway through their group, half shielding Tong Tong behind her frame. The way male coworkers would crane their necks to stare at women bending to collect packages in the break room. It held no trace of genuine admiration, only crude appraisal. Xin Yu had noticed too. Her brows knitted tight, the arm clutching her whistle, lifting half an inch off her side. He chose not to call him out on the lie. Mu reached into the pocket of his windbreaker and pulled out a handful of supplies, bending to set them on the ground halfway between the 2 parties. He did not stoop to pick them up. Lin Chen redirected the negotiation toward the sealed bunker door. Mu admitted the reinforced doorframe had been poured as one piece with the surrounding wall. The reinforced construction left no gap wide enough for a tool or blade. The entrance had no electronic panel, only a jammed turning wheel and mechanical locking latches. Then his eyes slid sideways, not toward Fang Min, but to the edge of the canvas bag tucked under her arm, peeking out slightly. An invisible taut line stretched between the 2 groups after those few exchanged words. Mu turned to glance at him. Lu Yuan explained that civil defense shelters placed separate exhaust vents beyond the main entrance. His reaction came from hearing technical knowledge his group did not understand. The men behind him exchanged uneasy glances. Mu forced his smile back into place, though it was far more restrained than before. Those few lines held a mountain of information, but their core purpose was plain: to make it clear to the opposing group that they could not survive inside the shelter without their expertise. Mu paused to deliberate for 2 heartbeats, shifting his weight from his left foot to his right. Lin Chen stared at the outstretched palm, feigning deep consideration. Suzu studied Lin Chen from behind the group. All his mental calculations were finished long before that furrowed brow appeared. Suzu realized Lin Chen's hesitation was only an act hiding a completed calculation. By reaching the bunker with 9 registered survivors, Lin Chen had transformed scattered strangers into a functioning survival team. Their combined skills now covered combat, science, engineering, logistics, medicine, navigation, and protection against mutated rat swarms. Mu believed hidden men and false friendliness controlled the negotiation. But Lin Chen had already identified every weakness in his performance. The former office, nobody now possessed the people, knowledge, and system income required to build the wasteland's strongest shelter.